Did you know that 50% of the US female population is now 40 years of age and older? This means women are spending more time in and after menopause than ever before. But menopause is not something to fear, and we don't have to simply suffer through its symptoms.
Welcome to the Spa Doctor podcast, where we uncover the secrets about women's health and hormones.
I'm your host, Dr. Trevor Cates, naturopathic doctor, best-selling author, and founder of the Spa Doctor. Every episode, we reveal the best-kept secrets for achieving glowing skin, natural beauty, a healthy body, and a balanced mind. Are you ready to live your healthiest life? Keep on listening. Hi, I'm Dr. Trevor Cates. Welcome to the Spa Doctor podcast. Today, we're tackling the misinformation and confusion surrounding women's hormonal changes leading up to and after menopause. We're uncovering how stress, gut health, blood sugar, and diet impact symptoms of hormonal imbalance. We're also doing a deep dive into the implications of the Women's Health Initiative study on hormone replacement therapy. And stick around to learn about a treatment that's changing the game for women's health as we age. Trust me, you won't want to miss a second of this. Our guest today is Lindsay Wojciechowski, who began her medical training in the emergency department nursing at Duke University. She went on to earn her MSN in nursing from Duke and practiced conventional medicine for 7 years. During that time, she saw both the benefits and challenges of the conventional medical system. While it helped some people, it fell short for others. After working as a clinical instructor at Duke School of Nursing and later at Duke University, Lindsay went on to earn a fellowship in integrative medicine and be trained in functional medicine. Lindsay now sees patients in Park City, Utah at the Energy for Life Centers, where she focuses on autoimmunity, hormones, gut health, and complex medical cases. Let's get ready to dive deep and uncover the truth together. Lindsay, it's so great to have you on the Spa Doctor podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
You and I have talked a lot together about women's health and hormones, and we've got some catching up to do, don't we? For the audience, there's been some misinformation around a particular study that's set us back when it comes to women's health and really helping women, especially as we transition perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause. And so that's what I really want to dive into with you today.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot to cover. I see women in clinic all the time who are curious about hormones. I think they're fearful of hormones. I think they're confused. I think women are very smart and like to be educated and like to make decisions that are best for them. But unfortunately, there just hasn't been enough information that's been relayed to the public in the last few decades to help women make an educated decision that's best for them.
Okay, great. And we're going to dive into that today, but let's just get on the same page. What is perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause? Like, what are the ages, the stages? How does someone know when they're in this?
Yeah, a lot of it is super vague. The average age of menopause for most women is 51 to 52. And I think most women assume that everything is normal up until that point, which we both know is obviously not the case. So most women are in a phase of perimenopause for 6 to 8 years prior to the onset of menopause. So for women who are on the earlier phases of menopause, perimenopause can impact women into their early 40s or even late 30s for some women.
And I think a lot of women are surprised when their doctor may bring up perimenopause, or their friend might talk about perimenopause, or they might be having symptoms and saying, why am I having these bizarre symptoms right now? Why is this happening to me? Why are my periods all over the place? Why can't I sleep? Why am I putting on this weight? And not realize that they're already in perimenopause, because I think so many women have not been taught about menopause and perimenopause. I know that they say the symptoms are 4 to 6 years, but I think for a lot of women, it can go on a lot longer, especially if we look at what some of those symptoms are. So can you go through some of those common symptoms, or maybe some of the even not so common ones?
I think it's important to say too that a lot of these symptoms that happen in the early parts of perimenopause are vague. And they also tend to be happening during times where women have a lot going on in their lives, right? These are also the years where most women are raising children or navigating navigating a marriage or aging parents or moving cross country or trying to keep their job or starting a career. This unfortunately tends to happen during a time when there's so many other pieces going on in a woman's life that can complicate how they feel. The initial symptoms of perimenopause, like I said, can be vague, but if I think of the biggies, tends to become, and not always, a lot of women transition through perimenopause without any problems whatsoever. But the common complaints that I hear from women are things like having a hard time sleeping, mood changes, feeling a little bit more irritable, some increases in depression, weight gain is a big one. As women tend to get later into their 40s, I hear a lot of complaints of brain fog, joint pain, just not feeling as sharp as they used to. Weight gain, as I mentioned, definitely tends to be one that women come in discussing. It tends to impact a lot. Those symptoms tend to be linked into other comorbidities that some women may have, whether it's low thyroid, vitamin deficiencies, autoimmunity. It all tends to get snarled together and certainly impacts the way we feel in a negative way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know a lot of women will talk about how their periods start to change. Right? And so they may go a long time without a period, and then all of a sudden it happens. And it could be super heavy, painful, and it can be really challenging. I'm 51, and it is this thing like, when's it going to happen? When's it coming? And it's such unpredictability of it, and that can feel unsettling, and not knowing when the hot flashes, night sweats, insomnia, mood problems are going to happen. It can be a really challenging time for women. And when we're not told what to expect, and there is this huge variability from one moment to another, it can be extremely hard.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And in terms of menstrual cycles, some women have perfectly normal menstrual cycles until they don't. And one day, maybe it just stops when they're 51, 52. And that's as simple or as complicated as it gets. But for a lot of other women, they tend to notice the cycles tend to become further apart. Maybe they're just more erratic. Maybe they have heavier cycles. There's really not one pattern that tends to fit all women. Everybody is very different and everybody brings their own unique portfolio.
And with that, I think it's important for women to realize it's still possible to get pregnant. Like, you're still having a period. It's still possible. We hear about stories, right? Women in their early 50s, maybe even like 53, it happens and they
Yes.
don't expect it.
I've had a few women in their late 40s who I've told them that they were pregnant. It's always a surprise.
Yeah. Which can be a total blessing, right? but if that's not something that you're planning on or hoping for, then just be aware that it is still possible. Okay. So some of the more bizarre symptoms that people don't usually associate with hormones, like chronic pain, or you mentioned autoimmune disease. That's not something that people typically think of relating to our sex hormones, right?
Inflammation, I would say, when you just mentioned joint pain, is a big one. As our estrogen levels tend to go down, our inflammatory processes tend to go up. Anything where there's already a little bit of a slow burn, whether it's an osteoarthritic knee or a shoulder issue, inflammation tends to go up significantly once we become postmenopausal or closer to that postmenopausal window. And so a lot of women who have been able to get away with how they've felt up until those perimenopausal years tend to find that those symptoms start to catch up on them and it's harder to get through the day. And different measures need to be made to help them feel well.
Okay, so let's talk a bit about what are the hormones and how are they changing as we go from the late 30s through our 40s, 50, when we hit menopause, postmenopause. What are the changes that are happening with our sex hormones?
Yeah, I think you and I have spoken about these in the past. Really, the first three that most people think of: estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. When I think of estrogen, I think of more of our proliferative hormone. I think of breast tissue and great skin and healthy bones. And when I think of progesterone, I tend to think of more of like our sleep support, our anti-anxiety. And when I think of testosterone, I think more of libido and muscle mass and those types of things. Some women tend to make testosterone pretty robustly into their perimenopausal and postmenopausal years. So that can be a variable for a lot of women that's different. Estrogen tends to be the hormone that tends to plummet more dramatically as we become postmenopausal. And progesterone is almost that sneaky hormone that tends to slowly decline in our 40s that, in my opinion, tends to contribute to some of those earlier perimenopausal symptoms, those things that I mentioned, such as having a little bit more trouble falling asleep, staying asleep, a little bit more irritable, muscle tension, those types of things. That's progesterone that's slowly declining in our 40s a little bit more gradually than the others. And interestingly, as I mentioned, a lot of women in their 40s have so many other variables that they're dealing with at that point in their life. And stress tends to shunt the production of progesterone, which really impacts the way women feel. So those symptoms may be subtle, but chronic stress or a high inflammatory diet or all of those other things that can contribute to stress tends to shunt that production of progesterone. And we end up with more significant symptoms than we otherwise would have had.
Okay, this is really important because I think so many women are living these lives right now during this time, like you said, so stressed. They're working hard. They're taking care of people. They're trying to maintain a social life. They're trying to stay healthy and exercise and fit it all in and be the superwoman, right? That we all want to be. And yet they don't even realize that stress is contributing. And the foods that they're eating, if they're eating pro-inflammatory foods, which so many people in the US are doing, that's also contributing to the hormonal imbalances. This is a big deal because I think so many women are saying, okay, what can I do? What hormones can I take or what? But hey, if you're not managing your stress and you're not eating healthy, nothing else is really it is gonna matter. But this is a really important part.
More is not better. And so I will say for most women in their perimenopausal years, I'll do what's called a Dutch test. This is a dried urine test that looks at urinary samples throughout the course of a 24-hour period. And why this is so incredibly important is it gives me a really good idea of the health of their adrenal glands. Our adrenal glands are cranking out cortisol, which we need to stay alive. And that cortisol is supposed to rise in the morning and fall into the evening and later into the evening so that we can fall asleep. The reason I always start by looking at this with women is because the majority of the women who I look at, their adrenal glands are wildly dysfunctional. They're either on overdrive and cortisol is just cranking out. There's so much cortisol coming out, or they're even at the more drastic extent where there's now so little cortisol because those adrenals are so exhausted that women are really almost just like on the gaslight. And why is this important? First of all, we need a healthy cortisol pattern to get through our day and stay healthy and well. And also, when that's dysfunctional and it's not working well, our body shunts the production of hormones. Our body doesn't care if we reproduce, if we can't stay alive well. The production of our hormones, primarily, like we mentioned, that progesterone is shunted so that our adrenal glands can do what they need to do. So this is not the time in our lives I know it's hard to say, to be doing everything that we think we need to be doing. This is really the time to be selective, to say, what fills my tank? What do I want to be doing? What's necessary for me? And what can I delegate? What can I say no to? And what doesn't fill my tank? And really being purposeful about how we're spending our time and our energy.
Okay, Lindsay, we both know that's easier said than done, right? So can you share with us how you do it? How do you manage to balance it?
I have figured it out perfectly. The reason that I am doing this work is because I have a lot of compassion for it. I'm trying to navigate these waters as well. So I am a mom. I have parents. I am navigating a career. It is not easy. And this is something that has taken me a long time to even realize the value and importance of it. And I will not sit here and say that I've got it all figured out. I come to this plate with a lot of compassion, and I know that it's challenging. We have a lot on our plates, and it's a big, complicated world that we're trying to navigate.
I think that's so important for us to talk about because I feel the same way. It's every day I wake up, what's happening today? And how am I going to create this balance? And it's never going to be perfect, right? We have to know that perfect is not possible. It's just not. Right. And the more we try to hold on to that control and that perfectionism and that we have to have it all figured out, the harder that is for our body. So finding some things to incorporate in our lives that bring us some joy and peace and to know when to say no.
I think simpler is better. And my kids and I, maybe I've mentioned this to you, my kids and I have created our own delight lists because I've realized how easy it is to get distracted in a complicated world where I'm getting pulled in 10 different directions, and it's often easy to lose sight of what fills my tank. So My kids and I have created our own delight lists that change over time. And there are times where I will literally put it on the fridge. This fills my tank. This drains my tank. And I know that, of course, I know those things, but it's really easy to lose sight of them. And there are things on my delight list that are as simple as sitting in my front lawn under the stars, or some really terrible 80s music that I will not mention here. Or we all have our own, but I don't think it needs to be complicated. I feel like this day and age, we actually probably need to simplify it.
Oh, I completely agree. I love the delight list. That's a great one. So you talked a little bit about the stress. What about inflammation? Inflammatory foods. Inflammation is such a big one, right? Let's talk about that. And then I want to make sure we talk about the Women's Health Initiative study, because that's a really important topic for us to be talking about right now. But let's talk about inflammation.
Inflammation is everything. I've been in medicine for about 20 years, and I can't think of a single disease process that's not exacerbated or caused by inflammation, right? So we all marinate on earth. Let's think of all the things on earth that can drive inflammation: environmental toxins, poor air quality, the standard American diet, stress, loneliness, no community. All of those things are pro-inflammatory. The obvious ones: smoking, sugary foods, etc. But all of those processes drive inflammation and drive disease. And like we've already talked about with hormones, shunt the production of hormones that we need to stay vital and healthy. So when I think of things that we can do to take control of inflammation, obviously, like we've talked about, stress response or stress support is essential. I think that's really the basis of this. Being smart about what you expose yourself to, not smoking, trying to stay where there's good air quality, being thoughtful about what's in your home. And diet is massive. We're all consuming food throughout our days. I say foods that were made on earth, foods that are not made out of a box or a factory, and eating them in abundance. We've talked about really good controlled blood sugar. You and I have talked about that before. As we know, when blood sugar and insulin levels are spiking throughout the day because we're eating simple, starchy, sugary foods, every time those sugars spike, inflammation is driven. Really keeping control of a good low glycemic diet, eating foods that are complicated. So they have fats, they've got proteins, they have fiber. All of those things make our sugars rise and fall slowly and gradually, as opposed to these wild peaks that happen with simple, starchy meals.
Blood sugar is such an important one to talk about. And you and I, when we've given talks together, we were both had continuous glucose monitors that we were wearing at the time, not because we are diabetic, but because you and I want to know how our bodies respond to what we eat. And everyone is different, right? You and I could eat the same meal and our blood sugar could do slightly different things. There are some things that if you and I both had a piece of cake, both of us would have these spikes in blood sugar, right? But there are other foods that are seemingly healthy and yet they will spike our blood sugar, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's never too early to learn your patterns with food. So I can't emphasize this enough. It's really fun. There's so many direct to consumer controlled glucose monitors on their market now. So you can just get online and buy one. It gets shipped to your house. And everybody always texts me, what does this number mean? What does this number mean? What I tell people is just pay attention to patterns, right? So are you eating foods that are just causing gradual rises and falls? Awesome. Do you have an episode where your sugar goes really high really quickly? Okay, interesting. Pay attention. What did you have? What was your mood before that? I wore mine for 3 months and drove my family crazy by ruining all the fun dinner conversations we could have otherwise had. But it was so fascinating to me what I had earlier in the day, what my stress level was at that point. I had a few times where I got really anxious about a few things going on in my life at the time, and my blood sugar went crazy high. So it's not a matter of feeling panicky about it. It's just a matter of learning patterns and getting to know your body and how it responds. Because if it doesn't feel important now, I promise you it will later.
It's so true. My husband and I did it together. I'm not using it anymore, but I did for a period of time just to have an idea. It really did surprise me how stress and sleep and exercise impacted my blood sugar. I was doing it mainly for the foods I was eating. And it was interesting how my husband and I, how we would eat even a smoothie. He would make me a smoothie in the morning and he'd be like, oh, that was great for my blood sugar. And mine went up. I had a spike. I'm like, there was something in that smoothie doesn't work for me. So we had to find a middle ground that worked for both of us. But I was really, and I know the science behind it, but I was still surprised to see in these moments, like you said, moments of stress, where my blood sugar would go up, or when I would be exercising, going for a nice long walk, how my blood sugar would stabilize and how it would come down after a meal. And so, can you explain a little bit about that connection between stress and our blood sugar?
Yeah, well, I mean, if we're under stress, our body believes that maybe we need to run away. Our body doesn't know if I'm stressed because you and I got into an argument or if I'm getting chased by somebody and there's a real danger. So our body is going to produce a lot of natural blood sugar in order to help me survive and run quickly. So that's a process that's meant to help us and protect us. It's just not meant to happen 24 hours a day like it is in our culture right now.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay, so let's come back around to talking about hormones and what's been happening lately in the media and some awareness around a study called the Women's Health Initiative Study. So, can you first explain what that was? And if you want to go ahead and go into why it wasn't so perfectly designed?
So yeah, this was a study that was done in the 1990s. It was I believe it was the biggest study that was ever done. It was called the Women's Health Initiative. It was funded by the NIH. They put almost $1 billion of money into this study, and it lasted about 15 years. They had, I believe, over almost 160,000 women that were enrolled in this study. And it had been done with really great expectations. There had been studies in the decades prior to that that had shown hugely big benefits for women going through perimenopause and symptom reduction, as well as a presumed reduction in cardiovascular disease. So studies had been done prior to this one that were really favorable, and this was really the biggest one that came out. This study, unfortunately, was prematurely discontinued about 15 years after it was started. It was discontinued because there was a concern that the hormone replacement therapy increased the risk of breast cancer and blood clot. So if you have a blood clot, it can always increase your risk of heart attack or stroke. And numbers were released before the data was interpreted by the researchers. And those numbers were just picked up by the news and released. And once those bits of information got out there, it was almost impossible to get it back. I think it's important to realize when we start hormone replacement therapy, we generally start this for women either going through perimenopause or right when they've hit menopause. And this study, the average age of the participants enrolled were 63, and that was at the start of a 15-year study. The majority of these women were in their late 70s by the time the study finished. So there were a lot of comorbidities on board that don't typically represent a typical woman going through perimenopause wanting to get on hormone replacement therapy. Most of them had been menopausal for over 10 years. I believe 70% of them were obese or overweight. More than half of them smoked, which for anyone who's tried to get birth control pills and smoked in college, you always knew that was a no because of the risk of heart attack or increased risk of clot. More than half had high blood pressure, and a lot of younger women were excluded because they were worried that a lot of them would drop out if they found out they were in the placebo group because the expectations behind symptom relief were so high. There were 3 arms of the study. So they had one group that was estrogen and progestin. These were women who had an intact uterus. And then they had a group of women who were just estrogen alone. These were women who did not have a uterus, who'd had a hysterectomy. And then there was a placebo group. And the study was stopped because they found that in the group that took the Prempro, so that was estrogen plus progestin, there were extra cases of breast cancer. It is important to know that this increased risk of breast cancer was not statistically significant. And it's even more important to realize that in the group that only got estrogen, the Premarin group, there was no increased risk of breast cancer. In fact, it was found that the women who took the estrogen replacement therapy had a lower increased risk of breast cancer. They also found that women that were diagnosed with breast cancer while on estrogen replacement therapy had better prognoses than women who were not on it at the time of diagnosis. And women who were given estrogen in the Women's Health Initiative study who got breast cancer later had a better outcome. What was found is that the women who had those increased risk of, or the few higher numbers of breast cancer, we now know that it was due to the combined estrogen plus progestin, which is a synthetic progesterone.
Let me just pause for a second because that's really important for women to understand the difference. Is that, first of all, the types of hormone replacement therapy used in this is not the type of hormone replacement therapy that you and I do. It was Premarin, which comes from horse mare urine, and progestin, which is synthetic progesterone. It is not progesterone. So not molecularly the same as our natural, our own hormones.
No, correct. I don't know any responsible provider who is administering hormone replacement therapy who is using a synthetic progestin or synthetic progesterone, also known as progestin. So a responsible provider giving hormone replacement therapy should be giving progesterone, which can be given transdermally or orally, but no. So the progestins that were used in that Women's Health Initiative are still used in things like birth control pills, right? But that's not what we're using for hormone replacement therapy.
We just pause for a second to say how unfortunate that is that progestin is still being used for birth control. So we're talking a lot about perimenopause, when we're talking all about perimenopause, menopause today. But for women who are put on birth control, even that there are IUDs, certain IUDs that have hormones, which is progestin, not progesterone. But I've heard gynecologists saying to their patients or patients thinking that they're being put on an IUD that has progesterone, which is completely different. And then women come and see us that have those types of IUDs or those types of birth control that have progestin, and they're, why are my hormones all out of whack? Why do I feel like I do? What's going on? And they're not realizing that it's not progesterone that they're on.
This makes me actually so frustrated. I don't understand why it's been so hard for the medical community to just simplify this, because this is the piece that has been linked to breast cancer. And when you do a quick Google search about the safety of hormone replacement therapy, it will still say that there's an increased risk of breast cancer with hormone replacement therapy. But what they're referring to is Prempro. That's the pharmaceutical combination of synthetic estrogen and synthetic progesterone, not the hormones that you and I had when we were 30 and 40 and in our most vital years. That's not the hormones they're referring to. They're referring to a pharmaceutical created hormone replacement therapy. And it's really a big difference.
Yeah. And so hopefully as we bring more awareness to this and people will start to ask their healthcare providers for something different, hopefully change will hopefully occur. In the meantime, let's go back to the Women's Health Initiative study. And what is the impact that this has caused by this study, basically?
Yeah, a lot of fear and uncertainty and confusion, understandably. The one other piece I do want to mention is it was pulled because of two things, right? There was the increased breast cancer risk, which we know was progestin, not progesterone. But there was also an increased risk of heart attack and stroke. So anything that estrogen, if taken orally, can increase the clot risk. This is why if you went into the student union when you were in college and you asked for birth control pills, they always asked, do you smoke? And if you do, no, you may not have a birth control pill. Remember, these were 70-year-old women and more than half of them smoked, and they gave them estrogen by mouth. That's how this hormone replacement therapy was given to these women. So yes, I'm not trying to dismiss the risk. If you give estrogen orally, it does increase your risk of clot. So you want to pay attention to your anti-inflammatory lifestyle that you and I have already discussed. But again, most providers being responsible about hormone replacement therapy are giving it transdermally. So progesterone can be given by mouth, orally, or transdermally. Estrogen is usually given by a patch or a gel or a cream transdermally to reduce that risk. So it's just important to understand what you're asking for, what you're getting, and the benefits and the risks. Unfortunately, over the last 20 years, understandably, women have been confused, misinformed, and women have the right to decide what's best for them. And I'm not here to say that everybody should be on hormone replacement therapy. There are a lot of women who want to navigate it naturally and do so without any issues, and they feel wonderful. And that's great. For those who have debilitating perimenopausal symptoms, postmenopausal symptoms, or are aware of the challenges we undergo when we go through menopause and the increased risk of things like osteoporosis and Alzheimer's and et cetera, and want to reduce that risk by taking natural hormone replacement therapy, by all means, we should have the right to do that.
Yeah. And I think that's important that when we do this safely, you and I have done a lot of the bioidentical hormone replacement therapy. And that is the natural, molecularly the same as our own types of hormone replacement therapy. And not only is it helping their symptom management, but the quality of life. So that's an important thing. So there's symptom management. So things like insomnia and irritability and these ups and downs, this roller coaster. The hormone replacement therapy can help smooth that out. It's not always perfect. Don't expect to go into your healthcare provider and get it right the first time, because sometimes we need to tweak it. We need to adjust. We need to do testing, and then we need to balance it a little bit. So there's that part, but there's also the quality of life. So things like bone health, brain health, vaginal health. And these are things that some women don't have these symptoms or don't even realize there's a connection until they've gone some time and then look back and go, oh, maybe I should have been doing this.
Yeah. For women who are on hormone replacement therapy, aside from the symptom management that you're referring to, the brain fog, the insomnia, the irritability, the effect on serotonin when estrogen levels decrease, the effect on inflammation when estrogen levels decrease. But the others, like 50% reduction in hip fracture with hormone replacement therapy. I think we forget that as many women die of breast cancer, die of hip fractures every year. Significant decrease in colon cancer risk, significant decrease in Alzheimer's, which women are at higher risk, especially postmenopausal. The decrease in cardiovascular disease, especially for those who start hormone replacement therapy early. And then, as you mentioned, vaginal health, skin health, reduction in hot flashes, night sweats, et cetera. So, there are certainly, and all of this is doing is mimicking our more vital years, right? Our 30s and our 40s, when these hormone levels are more robust and more stable and fluctuating in healthier ways.
Yeah. Thank you. And you mentioned the impact of the public and women when that Women's Health Initiative study came out and how that confused people. But I think one of the biggest things that happened is healthcare providers got really scared. I was just coming out of medical school when this was released. And I remember the scare, the fear of, do we do this? Do we not? What does this mean? And fortunately, I was naturopathic doctor and still am. And our community was talking more about bioidentical hormones and how we were talking about at that point, these aren't the same types of hormones. It's going to be different. And I was studying with people like Dr. Jonathan Wright, who had been doing bioidentical hormones longer than anybody. So he had that safety record and understanding. But there was this impact on healthcare providers, and it's still a problem. And this is where so I hope we have some healthcare providers watching this, because I want healthcare providers to feel like it's okay now. You don't have to be afraid of hormone replacement therapy anymore, because people are still going into their healthcare providers like, I don't feel safe prescribing that for you. Good luck.
Or you have a family history of breast cancer, or all of these things that, those old things that we thought about with hormone replacement therapy, we just have a hard time shaking it. So agreed. Yeah.
Yes.
So much more resources have been put into men's health as they've gotten older. Think about all of the information we get about erectile dysfunction, because there are easy prescriptions to help support that. Certainly that has not been the case for women.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate, but we can reverse this damage. We know now that there are safe ways to do this. And unfortunately, what does happen with healthcare providers is what they do feel comfortable prescribing is birth control pills, which could you just briefly explain why that is not the same as hormone replacement therapy? I know you touched on it a little bit, but just because I think I hear this a lot, even women who are already past menopause, they can't even get pregnant and they're being put on birth control pills.
Listen, there perhaps is a place for birth control pills when you're looking for pregnancy prevention, right? So there's nothing that will compare to the pregnancy prevention component of a birth control pill. But that's where it stops. When we're now looking for symptom relief and perimenopausal support, giving synthetic estrogen and synthetic progesterone is not the same. In fact, when you use something like progestin, which is a synthetic progesterone, yes, it helps slough off that uterine lining, which we're looking for oftentimes when we're trying to prevent the buildup of the endometrium every month. But that's where the benefits stop. At that point, progestin is binding to our progesterone receptors and in fact inhibiting it. So all those incredible benefits of progesterone, which we haven't even touched on all of them, in addition to anxiety and sleep support, it helps to protect our bones. It helps estrogen receptors work better. It's neuroprotective. All of those benefits are now inhibited. And so people tend to feel the effects of that in addition to the increased breast cancer risk, which we've already alluded to. But as a hormone mimicker, it's not doing the same thing. And the women who I then decide to put on hormone replacement therapy using bioidentical components, the women who have been on oral contraceptive pills in the years prior to that, those are by far the most challenging women to get to stable therapeutic levels of a hormone replacement therapy because the receptors have been impacted in a negative way by those birth control pills using synthetic ingredients.
Yeah. And of course, the most important thing is that we want people to work with their healthcare providers, finding the right healthcare provider that will be able to support you through this because everyone is so different. Lindsay, one woman to another, it's so surprising how differently women will go through menopause and the things they experience. Now, I noticed that genetically, if your mom is still around, or your sisters, or if you can ask them, I find that there is typically a genetic pattern. So your family members, the other women in your family go through menopause, that can sometimes be an indicator. Do you find that to be sometimes the case too?
Yeah, no, without question. Absolutely.
So before we end today, what is a great place for someone to start with? Say we have women that are listening that are like, oh, wow, this is all really great, but where do I start? What do you suggest?
I would say start by thinking about how do you feel? If you feel well and you feel like the measures that you're taking in your life are making you feel healthy and energized, that's a wonderful place to start. If you're not feeling well and you go to the provider that you're seeing and you say that you're not feeling well and they run a few labs and tell you everything's fine, I would advocate for digging a little bit further, finding a provider who is willing to take the time to sit with you, to find out about your specific situation, your specific stressors, your comorbidities, and putting the whole picture together for you. Everybody is different. Everybody needs something different. Like we've said, people have other comorbidities or other factors that weigh into how their menopausal symptoms are impacting them. It's just really important to find somebody who will take the time to listen and create a plan that's best for you.
Yeah, well said. And of course, Lindsay, I know you and I have given talks together, so I know you're also a big fan of looking at supplements and herbal remedies and things that also can help with symptom management and doing other types of tests, like looking at blood sugar, looking at vitamin D levels and things like that, because those are all supportive. We need to do those things. We don't just jump to hormone replacement therapy. We look at how can we support someone's lifestyle.
Yes, absolutely. You certainly don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. If you're really suffering through perimenopause and your postmenopausal years, you don't want to just put everything into hormone replacement therapy or everything into supplements or everything into exercise. I'd really advocate for a comprehensive approach.
Awesome. Thank you, Lindsay. This has been absolutely amazing. Will you tell everyone where they can learn more about you? Where are you seeing patients?
Absolutely. I'm seeing patients in Park City, Utah at the Energy for Life Center and doing consultations there for women, for autoimmunity, for complex care, and just trying to be a thorough, comprehensive provider.
Great. Thank you so much, Lindsay. This has been fantastic.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Thanks for joining me. If you found today's episode enlightening, please consider sharing it with a friend or tagging someone on social media who could benefit from these insights. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram and subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay updated on our latest episodes and behind-the-scenes content. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Spa Doctor Podcast. See you next Sunday for a new episode on your journey to living your healthiest life at any age.